Yes.
My question may be a bit of a devil's advocate question. You spoke about detachment from suffering, and that can come from an understanding of the impermanence of things. Now, my question is about the execution, or how practical is this for people to really take it into their lives? We talked about the illusion giving way to reality, the theory going into the practical. How theoretical and how much of an illusion is the concept that one can really achieve what one is trying to set out to achieve, to change this mix of emotions?
Great. It's not a devil's advocate question. It's the key or most important question that every person should ask. And the question was, for asking me to comment on the practicality, the reality of changing or attempting to change the mix of emotions that lead to our suffering and to transform them into a way out of suffering. Is this realistic? Is it practical? And the specific phrasing was the concept of this. So the Buddha encouraged, and I hope everyone here who's practicing meditation encourages, that intelligent skepticism. Intelligent skepticism should be the approach to life, also to Vipassana. So obviously, just by listening to me, you shouldn't believe what I'm saying. And the question is, if you give it a try, will you find a concept translated into something valuable for you? At the empirical level, we say that Vipassana emerged out of the obscurity into which it had languished. It emerged only about 30 years ago under the teaching of Goenka. And in those 30 years, it has spread around the world. About 100,000 people are said to have taken Vipassana courses this year. And there's no motive. No one's getting anything other than the experience inside themselves. So that's the empirical validation that many people experience this as valid. I would add to that the most important things that I would wish to encourage your appropriate skepticism with are, the first is, human being is intrinsically a learning animal. The thing that most dramatically defines our species is the expanded capacity for learning. Why can't we have emotional learning? Why can't any person at any life stage with any degree of suffering make at least one step of progress? The second thing I'd say is, the Buddha taught a lifelong path. There were teachings later on under the banner of Buddhism, which is not the teaching of the Buddha, that had these melodramatic, in 1 minute, the person understood the sound of no hands clapping and became totally enlightened. That's not the teaching of the Buddha. The Buddha's teaching is, he said, it's a gradual training, and he used the analogy to training a horse to be a good steed. It takes a skilled trainer many years. So, and that goes back to the question about psychotherapy. Vipassana properly practiced, I would say, should start with your personal skepticism. Is this going to work? Is this practical? Of course, if you're just skeptical, you won't find out, so you have to take a step, see if it works for you. And the two guidances should be, why can't you learn? Why can't you learn and grow in the first day of the first course and the second day of the first course, and then every day of your life that you're practicing meditation? What makes you think you won't grow? I predict you will grow, because all human beings are capable of learning. However, you want to give it a long time scale, and the longer you work on it, the deeper it'll get. Yes?
You spoke about John Moore being able to transform his experience and not become a sadist.
Yes.
That would have been the most predictable thing. But could you say a little bit more about why you think he could go that way instead of the more predictable way?
I don't know. So I will share your delight in speculation. I think there's a number of things. And the question is, why did not John Muir become as sadistic as his treatment in childhood was? I think there are some reasons that I think about that are psychological. Strangely, abuse can have different meanings to the abused. Although his father was vicious, really vicious, I've understated. I didn't want to go into all the descriptions. Nevertheless, in a bizarre sort of way, he was well-intended. He never said, "I'm doing this to hurt you." He always said, "This is the teaching of the New Testament." It's an exceptionally bizarre interpretation of the New Testament, but it's not uncommon. And because of that, the effect may have been less. John Muir had a very devoted and kind mother, so he didn't have just one parent. He was an exceptionally talented person and was very well treated by the world. As a teenager, he was noticed to be a genius, and he was well cared for the rest of his life. But I also give a lot of credit to meditation. I think he was meditating. I think if you read him, everybody who reads him is stunned by the sort of depth of his sense of selflessness. A lot of people have attributed it to his training in the New Testament, because he was trained in the New Testament. Along with the beatings he got, they also got Bible teaching. But I attribute it to the kind of meditation that he was unconsciously and automatically practicing, and which began in his attempt to overcome the pain that was being inflicted upon him. As one way of coping with that pain, he just clicked into modes of meditation with no one to teach him, just figuring it out, just the way he figured out geology. And it's that meditation, I think, that transformed him. That's my personal theory. Yes?
You reference thick people at times.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you what you think or feel or both when you deal with thick people at the health insurance company.
The question is, how do I deal with thick people at health insurance companies? I think that's the hardest question I'm ever going to be asked. It's very amusing to me to go back and actually read the texts of the Pali Canon, the texts in which the Buddha's teaching is preserved. Those teachings were considered the textual basis for the spread of the Buddha's word for a long time, and then eventually they got more or less overshadowed by the teachings of Buddhism, which added many texts that weren't taught by the Buddha. When we go back to the Buddha's teaching, one of the things that's most striking to me is the disjunction between my personal expectation of what I would imagine in my naive daydreams, what I would imagine a Buddha would behave like, and the actual behavior of the Buddha. He was a very firm, tough cookie. He was not a weak-willed or flaccid person. He was a person who stood firm on his beliefs and on his interpersonal relations in thick and thin. And, of course, he had impressive charisma, but he was very clear about what he believed. He did not back down on his moral position. He was not wishy-washy. I recently went through an episode in which some of our possessions were stolen and we were supposed to get money back, and we had to persevere quite emphatically in order to be heard. So I would say I find that in dealing with people that I consider fundamentally, at best, amoral, I try to be as clear and as unrelenting as I can be. And I don't think that that's different than the teaching of the Buddha. Yes, back there.
Would you talk a little bit about passion and
Passion?
emotion?
Yes.
And certainly a number of the people you talked about were passionate
Yes.
about things. Why isn't it negative?
Great question. The question is about passion. I talked about emotion, and where does the emotion of passion fit in? Well, one of the very great difficulties of human language is trying to capture what emotion we're talking about when we use language and what words mean. And that was why, for example, my talk, Spiritual Emotions, that's just a term I coined for this talk. It actually has no previous meaning in English. And when we talk about passion, nobody knows what we're talking about. We're all referring to something different. Lots of times in colloquial English, the word passion is given a very positive spin. We say, that's a student in my course who's really passionate about learning, and that means we like that student. And other times we can say that a member of that cult is really passionate about his belief, and it means we kind of think they're overstated, maybe cuckoo. So what does passion mean? And so to divide that word into a few different words and give it more flexibility in English, as I described, the Buddha lists different states, positive and negative, and I've tried to understand them for myself by looking at one guideline that runs through all of them. Those that are primarily to augment my sense of self, make me think I'm permanent, big, grand, cool, and wonderful, and everything about me is fabulous, my country's better, my nation's better, my religion's better. Those types of mental states do not lead to harmony. They lead to self-aggrandizement. Those mental states that lead to affiliation, harmony, identity, calm, peace, those kinds of mental states produce calm in me and calm in those I am capable of relating to in that way. So when we use the word passion, if we mean very strong determination, I would describe the Buddha. This goes back to the answer when somebody said, how do you deal with like healthcare insurers, which is a topic of hair-raising anguish for all healthcare professionals today. The answer is the Buddha was a very passionate person in that limited sense of the word passion. That is to say, he took fervent positions which he held through thick and thin, having realized them deep within himself to be life-giving, helpful to himself and helpful to others. An example would be when he was asked to make a shift on a certain moral position. He would hold to his moral position. When he was asked to make a shift on something he felt was the integrity of his teaching, the quality of the text as it comes down to us has a vibration of fervor, of a deep conviction and belief based upon personal experience. In that sense, we could view the teaching as passionate. If by passion we mean self-important, self-aggrandizing emotions, often those are indeed praised in our culture. And I think you would find there's a disjunction between the worldview that I'm speaking for as a practitioner of Vipassana and, let's say, our common political life, in which a hot-headed vocalism is mistaken for authentic vision or belief. I would say, and that kind of use of the word passion, it is not really something that's going to bring, in my view, in the view of a meditator, I don't think it'll bring harmony and peace between people. In the same way, bringing the word passion more specifically to the erotic arena, where it is often applied, when it is a bond between two people and a producer of domestic, social, familial harmony, then it's a way station. Buddhas are obviously don't participate in family life. Sammasambuddha's great teachers of the Dhamma are beyond family life. But for most people, most of the time, most people will want a family life, a partnership. And that is a bonding, a healing emotion that brings people together in a mood of harmony. Then I don't know if we would call that passion or not. That's different than lust, another English language word, which refers to erotic life that is for its own sake. It's not affiliative. It's not bonding. It's not with a goal of producing an enduring harmony between two people. It's a narcissistic goal. That form of erotic passion is not going to produce harmony. Yes?
So in one of your essays, I think the Healer, you use a phrase saying calamity is sweeter than excitement and pain is better than hate. I guess that's the core of Vipassana. Could you elucidate that, please?
Could you repeat the phrasing again?
The phrase was calamity is sweeter than excitement and pain is better than hate. Those are your phrases, I guess.
Very nice. Yeah. Good. I'll try to repeat that. Equanimity is better than excitement. Sweeter than excitement. And pain is better than hate. Yeah, that's interesting because it goes back to the question about passion. I think I was profoundly confused on this point when I started life. Hopefully I'm less confused. I think our culture helped augment this confusion in me, and I think it augments this confusion in others. The difference between well-being that comes from equanimity and well-being that comes from excitement. They're very different. We do, as a culture, we stereotype something as exciting. I do remember thinking, when you go through medical training, you're expected to go through all the different subtypes of medicine before you make your decision. So you practice a little internal medicine, pediatrics, radiology, surgery, etc., psychiatry eventually. And I remember some professors trying to get me interested in something, and they'd go like, well, this is a really exciting field. And I would think, well, then it's not for me. That goes back to what we call entertainment, and that may also have to do with passion. It goes back to what we call entertainment. Lots of times they say there's a really exciting performer coming. Well, I guess I'll come home agitated from that. But that's not to say that as human beings we should be dull, tedious, avoidant, hidden, or, as I started, dead, a flat affect, unemotional. So which emotions actually bring well-being? Equanimity, which means harmony, calm, peacefulness, which many people seem to then translate into their mind as dullness, boringness, etc. I find that a mistake which I also had, which I think meditation helped me correct. The kind of emotions I talked about today, those deep, enduring, like deep gongs underneath your life that feel life-giving and beneficial day after day. Equanimity is like that. I don't find excitement is like that. Now, pain is even more interesting because we very much negatively stereotype pain, and of course I don't like pain, nobody does. But I believe as a culture, in the culture of the West, we have a crisis of pain. If you listen, there are two very big topics in our American political discourse at this point in time. One is about Medicare, and one is about Social Security. And when I listen to those, I translate them in my own personal language into a dialogue about pain. People want to live forever without pain and will pay anything, will sink the entire ship in order that they never have to face pain or death. Now, I'm not thrilled about facing pain and death, but we ought to have some personal tool by which we can face pain with equanimity. There is absolutely no comparison of anything I've ever heard of to Vipassana for that. I recently had a medical procedure. I'm not going to be absurd and tell you which one. And I was told beforehand this would be very painful and you have to be prepared, and we've got all these medications handy, and I didn't want to be a hero, so I said, okay. And I went through the procedure, and then it was over, and I was waiting for the painful part. Now, it's not that I'm some big hero or anything like that, just as timid as anybody else, but I said to a number of my friends who are here today, who are thinking they may need this very same procedure, and they're concerned about the pain, I said it was much less than I've had on any 10-day course I've ever taken. The capacity to face pain has been a virtue in every single human culture except modern American society. So yes, there is a positive value. It shouldn't be exaggerated. Pain should not be created. We should, if we can, produce situations that are not painful, and even to avoid pain is intelligent and healthy. But it can't be fully avoided, so we definitely need a technique to face it. Yes? Yeah. Correct. Yeah. Right. One of the main ways that people avoid psychological pain is to blame it on somebody else. I'm in distress over certain things in my society, and if we only got rid of these other people, I wouldn't have this distress. One of the saddest parts of my life is that having had the opportunity to be a world traveler and visit many cultures, I've never been to a culture where I didn't, within minutes or hours or days of coming into this culture, find that the very lovely people I'm meeting are stereotyping with hatred some other group in their own country. And often it's groups I can't even tell apart. So, and that comes from an attempt to avoid personal pain and anguish, is to think that by attacking others somehow the plight of your human existence will be lessened. Yes?
You said something about sadness, sorrow, and grief.
Yeah, excellent. Could I say something about sadness, sorrow, and grief? The gateway to the Buddha's teaching is sadness, sorrow, and grief. The Buddha encourages awareness of these emotions. He does not encourage these emotions. He encourages awareness of these emotions. That distinction is one of the key questions that comes up during meditation courses. Lots of times people will become aware of something upsetting in themselves, some sorrow, typically. And they'll come up and ask, well, I've come to this course to develop harmony and equanimity, and now I feel very sad. So clearly the course is not working for me. And the answer is, this is how it works. It raises into consciousness this sadness, this sorrow, as a window or a example, or we could even say a provocation towards the better life. The first step on the Buddha's path in the very formal teaching of the kind I haven't talked about today is the awareness of suffering or sorrow is the first noble step. So becoming aware of our sadness, I put it in that way, all people have sadness. It's impossible not to be sad at some point, sometime. Being aware of that burden in ourselves, how we have produced it. That's a very Vipassana phrasing. How we have produced it, not how we were subject to it. And how we can come out of it. You can't be aware of the path out of it unless you're aware of how you got into it. So an awareness of these motions and a circumstance that catalyzes that awareness can be extremely helpful. Even put more powerfully, is the doorway to Vipassana. However, cultivating, augmenting, or increasing these emotions will only increase your burden. So there should also be a path, a tool, a way to emerge from them. Yes?
With the advances of communication and information technology today, the world is becoming very pragmatic and very small. How far apart are we getting from these old teachings and philosophical and spiritual world?
Great question. With the advances in communication and technology in this small and immediate world, are we drawing away from these ancient teachings and practices? I think so. It's an old observation about human society and culture that it tends to move in opposite directions at the same time. That's the theory of a dialectic, that as we get an increase in one extremist group on one side of a political spectrum, we typically catalyze the other extremist group on the other side of the political spectrum, so we prefer a political dialogue that's not as divided and more mainstream. I would say today we're in a emotional or cultural or spiritual extremist dialogue I'm not pessimistic because look at the way Vipassana is sweeping the world. And, Goenka-ji, who, when we first met him about 26 years ago, didn't have a single meditation center, any place to teach, just a basically unknown fellow going around India giving almost anonymous courses at random sites. Now, just finished addressing the UN, the World Economic Conference. There's 100,000 people a year taking courses in 75 meditation centers. That's all happened in a quarter of a century. So it's hard to be pessimistic in the presence of that. On the other hand, if we do look at the way people live today, most people seem to be more pressured, more frantic, have less time, and are less self-reflective and internally aware. So there seems to be a bifurcation. Hopefully we can overcome that. I share the tenor of your question, which is some dismay at the rate or pace at which many people are living. There's an old quote from Pete Seeger, the famous American folk singer I've quoted here before. He says, I wish I had more time, but most of my free time is taking up with all these labor-saving devices. and it's never been truer than today. So. Very interesting question. The question is whether the passion that may underlie a scientific enterprise, a scientist's passionate drive to discover something, which may be self-aggrandizing, and is often self-aggrandizing according to the questioner, whether that means the results will always follow the fruit being the scientist planting his egocentric ideas, and the fruit therefore possibly being destructive, even if it looks like, on the surface, he's pursuing something of social importance. As you were talking, I was thinking of the wonderful writing of Richard Feynman, the famous Nobel Prize-winning physicist, now deceased, who's also a wonderful writer. Feynman was part of the Manhattan Project, the development of the first atomic weapons. And he touches on that a little bit. Of course, that was the great moment of humankind's ability to stand up to and question the motivations that underlie science. The people who are developing the first atomic bomb were often motivated by pure scientific curiosity, and often they were motivated by an attempt to thwart what they perceived as evil. And it's an open question that the world still hangs on as to whether the development of nuclear weapons was harmful or helpful. I would answer, of course, on the question of nuclear weapons, who knows, I don't know. But I would answer, I think there's a kind of a sad or worried core to your question. There's so much scientific enterprise pursued mostly for financial profit and partly for egocentric gain. And is it all going to be destructive? And I would say I would give it a slightly more optimistic twist in the following way. I don't know if you're a meditator. All meditators who look inside themselves will see all their motives are heavily complex all the time. Even Freud told us that. He said every action is multi-determined. There are multiple causes for everything we do. So that scientist who we were talking about in a generalized way is probably motivated by many different variables. Some of them probably are quite selfish, but some of them may also at the same time be noble, and the fruit may be equally complex. I think we have to stop at this point. Yes? Okay. Great. So those very nice closing comments. I'll just echo them, and then we'll stop. The nice closing comments were, we all have, even meditators who are on the path of purifying their own motives will all make mistakes. We need compassion for ourselves and for others. And there's a story there just told of someone who suffered from child abuse and found Vipassana to be very helpful to them.